This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
COVID-19 cases continue to rise across the world, but there are also many more people recovering. We take stock of how African countries have been dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, and how a tour firm in South Africa is using technology to counter lockdown restrictions. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Searle Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Experts warn that the steep rise in domestic violence could be linked to a stay-at-home order, and why mass polio immunization campaigns are being suspended in Nigeria. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Let's begin with the latest on the COVID-19 pandemic. The number of confirmed cases worldwide is now more than 1.7 million. Over 103,000 people have died. More than 389,000 have recovered. The U.S. is the first country to report over 2,000 deaths in just one day. Cases there have risen to 500,000, more than a quarter of the worldwide total. Nearly half of all cases are in Europe, with Spain and Italy the worst hit. Iran, the epicenter in the Middle East, has registered more than 70,000 infections. The Chinese mainland is reporting 46 new cases. Africa has also been reporting new cases and recoveries. Kenya has so far confirmed 2 more cases, bringing the total to 191. The 2 are a local and a foreigner, and both have no recent history of traveling outside the East African nation. According to the country's health ministry, a total of 24 people have recovered from the infection. 7 have died. Elsewhere, Djibouti has 37 new cases with a total of 187, as well as 36 recoveries and 2 deaths. In Ethiopia, 10 people have recovered from the disease so far, and 3 have died. This comes as the World Health Organization warns that premature lifting of restrictions to curb COVID-19 could spark a resurgence of the disease. Well, it's been nearly 2 months since the first case of the coronavirus was reported in Africa. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports 700 deaths so far and more than 2,000 recoveries. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi spoke to the Africa CDC on the challenges facing the continent.
Nearly all countries in Africa have so far recorded coronavirus cases. Currently, the number of infected has surpassed 12,000. The Africa CDC says this is worrying.
This means that the strategies that we are putting in place need to address the fact that we have local transmission, and we also have community transmission that is going on. That is why the numbers are so big. So the continent is at a stage where Europe, for example, was some 6 weeks ago. So it is time that we did a lot more.
Lesotho and Comoros are yet to register any positive cases. The Africa CDC says it cannot be ruled out that they do not have any cases.
Their laboratory diagnosis capacity is still not where they can be able to test for COVID-19 in country, and that definitely slows down the ability to be able to get the cases and report. But we do hope still that if they are not reporting a case, then they don't have a case. We have systems in place that samples can be able to be taken from those countries to a neighboring country for testing, but nothing yet has been identified.
Since the epidemic began, the Africa CDC has distributed 60,000 test kits to member states and has procured 70,000 more from Germany. Transportation of the test kits to Africa is proving a challenge, with many countries around the world putting restrictions on international flights. Getting the kits here as fast as would have been expected is a hurdle. But there is also growing competition for the medical supplies.
The issue of tests remains a challenge because few companies are actually producing tests that we can be able to use in the laboratory. Because few companies are producing and many parts of the world are now getting the pressure of needing to test, it means that testing remains a challenge.
The Africa CDC says the massive lockdowns happening on the continent are key in enabling member states to implement massive screening and increased testing. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Egypt has confirmed 95 new COVID-19 cases and 17 new deaths. This is the smallest figure of new infections the North African country has recorded in a week. While the country enters its third week of partial lockdown, Cairo is expecting the number of COVID-19 cases to increase in the coming weeks. CGTN's Adel Al-Maroui tells us more.
Egypt announced 95 new COVID-19 cases on Friday night. It's the lowest number of infections reported in a week. But that doesn't mean the virus is slowing down. On the same day, the disease has claimed the highest number of lives yet, 17 deaths, according to the official health ministry statement. The total number of infections since the outbreak has risen to 1,794, pushing Egypt up to become the second highest African nation with the disease after South Africa. For weeks, Egypt has been in Africa's third position in the COVID-19 cases list, following Algeria. The government is warning the figures will rise in the coming weeks. Egypt is imposing a 10-hour night curfew to limit the infection rate. With exception to gatherings in cafes and entertainment centers, life is mostly resuming normally. Experts believe Egypt will reach the peak of COVID-19 infections by June. That could be brought earlier to May if government regulations of social distancing and wearing preventive kits are not followed properly. Adel Al-Maroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's now turn to South Africa. South Africa continues to have the highest number of confirmed cases on the continent. It has over 2,000 confirmed cases. The country has entered its second phase of lockdown, another 21-day period of no business, no movement, and closed borders. CGTN's Angela Coppola looks back on the country's first lockdown.
Cyril Ramaphosa, the country's president, has been leading by example in his approach to combating the virus. His attention is now turned to the second lockdown.
Over the next 2 weeks, we will roll out the community screening and testing program across all provinces, focusing in particular on highly vulnerable communities.
The first lockdown set the boundaries and apparently limited the spread. The second will see how successfully the country deals with the next stage.
We hope that we will then be able to get everything in place for what we sadly do anticipate to be many more patients coming into hospitals.
Testing is critical, especially in the vulnerable communities, including the inner city and high-density inner city areas.
I mean, the overcrowding in Hillbrow is significant, and I agree. And I think I totally agree with you. It is a hotspot, and I think it should be on the hotspot list, but it's not yet.
Until now, testing has been voluntary. That's about to change as between 10,000 and 20,000 healthcare workers start door-to-door testing. In neighbouring Yeoville, there's a largely unemployed expat community who are worried.
I'm worried about my health. It's difficult for you to stay if you don't know what's happening in your life. You don't know maybe the disease will affect you, so it's better for us to be tested. As soon as we get the chance, we want to be tested.
It's been a month since the state of emergency was announced, and we've just heard about that extension of another 21 days. And the people on the streets are shell-shocked because they don't know how they're going to cope financially or emotionally. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Hillbrow, South Africa.
South Sudan's government is asking for support from international donors to help the country strengthen its measures to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. There are now 4 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in South Sudan. CGTN's Patrick Oyette reports.
South Sudan's government has set up a task force to prevent the spread of COVID-19. It is headed by President Salva Kiir. The task force has ordered for closure of all businesses dealing in non-food items. It has also closed the country's borders and suspended all social gatherings.
I urge you to respect the and strictly follow the directives and advice of the task force. These measures are intended to protect rather than harm you. Each and every one of us has a duty to protect himself, herself, their families, and all their compatriots.
The World Health Organization ranks South Sudan as having one of the most underdeveloped health sectors in the world due to long years of civil war. There are also few health workers in the country, and Juba is asking for more support. South Sudan's health ministry says it is working to contain the spread of the coronavirus.
The Ministry of Health and partners, especially the World Health Organization and the UN system, have launched an outbreak investigation involving identification of contacts and possible testing of the contacts.
The United Nations says more than 180,000 South Sudanese people still live in tents only inches apart from one another in displaced people's camps. The displaced have limited access to health care, water, hygiene and food. South Sudan's government is now urging those still living in the displaced camps to voluntarily return to their own homes, adding that it would stop crowding at the camps and help in the fight against the spread of COVID-19. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The news continues on Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news. Here's a look at the headlines. Experts warn that the steep rise in domestic violence could be linked to stay-at-home orders. And how a tour firm in South Africa is using technology to counter lockdown restrictions.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
And welcome back. In Uganda, there is concern over rising cases of domestic violence. The country has been asking people to stay at home to limit the spread of the coronavirus. The UN warns that responding to these incidences is further straining police services on top of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Isabel Nikuria reports.
Joan Nachiranga walked out of an abusive marriage in June 2019. She suffered repeated physical abuse from her partner for 4 years. The violent relationship ended with acid being thrown at her, scarring her back and arms.
It was around 9:30 p.m. when I decided to go take a shower. I didn't know my husband had hidden behind the bathroom. As soon as I started scrubbing myself, he climbed up and poured the acid all over.
Now Joan regrets not leaving earlier. The case is still being heard in court and her husband is out on bail, but the trial has been put on hold due to the outbreak. For now, this rehabilitation shelter outside Kampala is helping her get her medical care. This shelter has remained open during lockdown period, and a few women who've managed to run away from abusive relationships are receiving legal care and counseling here as they recoup. Campaigners say they are overwhelmed by the number of cases reported every day during the coronavirus lockdown. This center received 28 cases in March, up from 17 in January. And responding to each case is especially difficult when there are added health considerations.
Even if I am to consider the calls, there are so many calls in a day. I receive over four calls, right from the survivors of violence reporting what they are going through down there in their homes, and also the referral pathway.
The UN warns poorer countries are most affected by the restrictions being implemented to combat COVID-19. In Uganda, the police say added stress from the outbreak is increasing problems within homes.
There are people who are at home and are not going to work. And some of them don't have savings to look at. So such a situation with the increased demands within the homes is bringing out a situation where there's increased tension.
The Ugandan police have had to form a task force to deal with domestic violence cases at a time when there is already high demand to enforce the lockdown. While the entire country is impatient for the outbreak to end, it's even more urgent for women like Joan. Her hope is that the lockdown comes to an end so that she can find justice. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, mass polio immunization campaigns have been temporarily stopped amid the global coronavirus pandemic. Nigeria is close to being declared polio-free, having recorded no cases for over 3 years. Here is CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with more on this story.
For decades, the World Health Organization and national health authorities have prevailed in the fight to eradicate polio globally. There's been over 99% decrease in cases globally, from 350,000 cases in 1988 to only 33 reported cases in 2018. Now, the World Health Organization recently suspended the fight against polio to focus on tackling the coronavirus pandemic.
Fighting polio is essential for the global health, but we have made a lot of gains in the fight of polio, and more currently, COVID-19 pandemic, it's claiming the lives of so many. And if you want to weigh the effects of the morbidity or illnesses and deaths coming from COVID-19, I think it's a very wise decision.
But polio survivor Esther Sunday is worried about the decision. Her life's been adversely affected, having lost her legs to polio at a very young age. Among several others, the graduate of marketing has faced intense discrimination in securing a job and a relationship, and it's not something she'll want to see trickle down as a result of WHO's decision.
If now they said they're going to withdraw it totally, I think polio will come back. And it's not our own wish for polio to come back, because we, that are survivors, we know what we went through. So we wouldn't be happy to see, or I would not be happy to see younger ones still having this same problem that I've overcome. They should still create some percentage still for polio.
All house-to-house polio vaccination campaigns have been suspended. Vaccination generates immunity, but there's still a possibility new cases can arise. Afghanistan and Pakistan are the two remaining countries in the world that have yet to end the transmission of wild polio virus. Nigeria is waiting to be officially taken off that list, after which the entire African continent will be certified free of the disease.
We're at the verge of being declared polio-free. But we still have some countries like the Pakistan and Afghanistan that are still having polio virus transmission. And we know that the world is a global village. There is globalization going on. So to say that you are free in one side of the world doesn't really make you free, because if transmission is ongoing somewhere, then other parts of the world are at risk.
Polio is most common in children under 5. The highly contagious disease is caused by a virus that attacks the nervous system, resulting in paralysis and sometimes death. With WHO's decision now, health experts are advising the primary health care to be more alert in order to protect the gains made so far. and the main focus now is on continuous routine immunization. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
It's been 2 weeks since South African President Cyril Ramaphosa initiated a nationwide lockdown in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Residents have adhered to the call of staying home, but many are missing the bush and its wildlife. Several game reserves are now offering virtual game drives. CGTN Julie Shire spoke to the Tin Swallow Safari Lodge guides to find out more.
South Africa is home to some of the world's most famous wildlife reserves. The Big Five is one of the main attractions, drawing in millions of local and international visitors. But a COVID-19 lockdown has kept everyone home. Thanks to technology, Tin Swallow Safari Lodge now allows you to take a virtual game drive.
How does this virtual safari work? Explain to us how it works.
Myself and Alistair, we wake up very early every morning. We get up at about 5 a.m. We head out there. We generally have a plan what we're trying to look for. So if we want to look for lions, we want to look for leopards, elephants, we'll head into certain areas where we know there's a good chance of finding them. And then we'll head out for about 4 hours a day. I mean, what makes it exciting is we'll never know what we're going to see out there.
So to be able to go out into the bush, both of us super passionate about what we do, and just be with the animals that we really love and cherish, is quite an amazing thing that we've never been able to experience.
Can anyone see it from anywhere in the world?
Yes, that's correct. You can see it anywhere in the world. You can go onto our Facebook page, Tin Swallow Safari Lodge. We've got it on a YouTube channel, and it's also on our Instagram channels.
One of these days, there were about 6,000 people following the safari. Is that correct?
You're 100% right. We had one day, I think we had about 50,000 views, I think, on our first post. And then a lot of the posts are averaging in the thousands, some 5,000, 6,000. And then I think there's one now above 10,000 as well.
Neil and Alistair digitally transport safari lovers through the 27,000-hectare private Mageleti Game Reserve, with some even preparing for the drive.
As a family, we thoroughly enjoy the bush, and it provides a great escape for all of us. And what better way than to have a virtual safari right in your living room, and you see the most incredible things. You never know what's coming, and we all enjoy it hugely.
Wow. For us safari addicts that are cut off from our fix, it's really the only way we can know what's happening. And for us that regularly go to the bush, it's like a continuation of the story that we already know. The big difference now is you're relying a lot more on the descriptions and explanations, and you're not distracted as much by the 360-degree view.
A lockdown is mentally challenging for everyone, but at least wildlife lovers can click on a button and continue to search for Africa's most wonderful animals. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And we're not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Let's take a peek at that headline. FIFA President Gianni Infantino warns against early resumption of football leagues.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa.